transformations? Okay, so we're looking at doing the same process as what we were before. So we're still doing reflections, we're still doing translations, we're still doing rotations. Okay, but we're doing it multiple times. Okay, so you're doing more than one within a problem. Okay, so we're doing two within a problem instead of just one. So the pattern of footprints left in the sand after a person walks along the beach illustrates the composition of two different transformations. Those transformations are a translation and a reflection. Okay, so when a transformation is applied to a figure and then another transformation is applied to that image, the result is a composition of transformations. So the footsteps in the sand example is a glide reflection. Okay, so a glide reflection is the composition of a translation followed by a reflection in a line parallel to the translation vector. The glide reflection shown is the composition of a translation along the vector W, followed by a reflection in line L. So starting off with this footprint here, we would translate it along vector W to get this one, and then reflect that over to get our final image there. Okay, so it does switch back and forth there. So it glides forward and then flips over with that reflection. So we are going to do some examples of these glide reflections below. So in triangle PQR, with the given vertices, we want to graph that triangle and its image after the indicated glide reflection. So first what we want to do is translate it along this translation vector, and then we're going to reflect it in the x-axis. So I want to plot each of these points first to create my pre-image. Okay, so point P is at 1, 1. Point Q is at 2, 5. And point R is at 4, 2. Okay, so here's my pre-image, that triangle. So next what I want to do is my first transformation, which is the first one listed. So we're going to translate along this vector. So this vector means that I need to move every single point left 2 spaces. Okay, so I'm going to move point P left 2 spaces. Plot my new point to get P prime. Same thing with point Q. Move it left 2 spaces to get Q prime. And then point R, left 2 spaces to get R prime. Okay, so here is my image after that first transformation. Now what I want to do is the second transformation. This one is a reflection in the x-axis. So I'm going to take each of these points that I found, my prime coordinate points, and I want to reflect each of them in that x-axis. Don't go back to your pre-image coordinates. Okay, so don't go back to this one. We want to reflect the ones we just found in the x-axis. So point P is 1 unit away from the x-axis. So we'll go 1 more unit below here. And we label this as P double prime. So instead of 1 apostrophe, now you have the 2, because it's your second image. Okay, same thing with Q. This one is 5 units away from the x-axis. So go 5 units further. That's Q double prime. And then R prime is 2 units away. So we'll go 2 units further. Okay? And I am going to write out each of my coordinates here. So first, starting with my prime coordinates, P prime is at -1, +1. Q prime is at 0, 5. And R prime is at 2, 2. Okay, then moving on to my double prime. I have P double prime is at -1, -1. Q double prime is at 0, -5. And R double prime is at 2, -2. Okay, so first I did that translation using that translation vector. Then I took those points that I translated and I reflected in the x-axis. Okay, questions on how I did letter A in example 1. Okay, so you always do the listed transformation that's first. You do that one first. Okay, you have to do that one first and then the second one second. If you flip-flop them, your image will not land in the same spot. Okay, so if I were to reflect in the x-axis and then translate, it's not going to be in the same spot. Okay, so I want you guys to do letter B. So you're using these same pre-image coordinates that we did for this one. Okay, so this first triangle, we're using those same pre-image coordinates here as well. Except now you're going to translate along this vector and then reflect in the y = x line instead. Okay, so I want you guys to try letter B.
Getting really close to you go up to me. Right, 3 up. Let's go off the chart.
She didn't do that. And then you want to reflect in the y = x line. So write out your prime coordinates that you just found, and then you're going to just switch x and y to get your next one.
Actually did it on myself.
Good job. I'm proud of you.
This one's bigger than the other one. That's good. And then for your second one, you from the second triangle, you would down 3 over 3 down 3.
No. You have to reflect in the y = x line. So write out your prime coordinates that you just found. So write those off to the side.
I'm just gonna say so it's -130. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's R is
I can in a class right now.
1 is negative 1. Okay. What do you know?
So now to get your double prime coordinates, right, you're going to just switch your x and y value. So you're going to just negative. So if you say it's negative.
I paid $60.
Yeah, you have to do $60 versus negative 1, negative 3.
What?
Switch the two.
3, negative 1. So, that's all you do.
What is your?
Yeah, mine's this is not working. I need to be and then negative
Yeah, home. Chill.
Oh my God.
because if you switch off, that they're both negative 2.
You need to connect this point to this point.
Mine looks fine to me. Mine looks good.
All right, so I'm going to start going through this one.
Oh, I was about to read to the wrong.
Quiet down now, please. So for this one, I'm going to translate each of my points in my pre-image, left 3 and then down 3. Okay, so point P, I'll move left 3 and down 3. Okay, and that will be P prime. Same thing with point Q. Left 3, down 3. Same thing with R.
I got that part.
Okay, so here is my image after that translation. So what I want to do is write out each of my coordinates. So P prime is at -2, -2. Q prime is at -1, 2. And R prime is at 1, -1. Okay, so then what I want to do is take each of these coordinates and I want to reflect them in the y = x line. To reflect in the y = x line, all we have to do is switch our x and y value in our coordinate point. Okay, so to get P double prime, I'm just switching those two values. Now when I switch those two values, it's going to remain the same. So P double prime is -2, -2. Q double prime, again, switching x and y. So now I have 2, -1 as my coordinate. Okay, you're just flip-flopping them. And then R double prime would be -1, +1. Okay, so you're just switching those values. So now that I've found those double prime coordinates, I want to plot them on my graph. So P double prime is going to stay at -2, -2. Shh, quiet please. Q double prime is at 2, -1. And R double prime is at -1, +1.
How's mine with 3?
I don't know.
Mine got 3.
Did you not go down 3?
Oh, I'm 3. It's the worst.
Okay, so here would be my final image. Okay, so that one right there is my final image after that glide reflection. Okay, questions on how I did either of these two problems? Okay, so you translate it first and then we reflect it second. You always have to do that second transformation with the prime coordinates that you found. Don't go back to the pre-image. Okay? All right. Then, the composition of two or more isometries is still an isometry. Okay, so an isometry again is a transformation that keeps its size and shape. So when we did this glide reflection, so that translation and then the reflection, our triangle still stayed a triangle and it still had the same length on each side. It didn't get bigger, didn't get smaller. We didn't add an extra segment in to make it a rectangle, nothing like that. Okay, so it stays that same size and shape even though you're doing more than one transformation. Okay, that's all this is saying. So then I want to move into example 2. So this time we're taking a segment. Okay, so it's not a triangle, we just have a segment. So segment CD with these given points here, we want to graph that segment and its image after a reflection in the x-axis and a rotation 90 degrees about the origin. So since it says reflection in the x-axis first, that means that's the first transformation you need to do to your pre-image. Okay, so first thing I want to do here is graph segment CD. Okay, here are my given points and I want to graph those two. So point C is at -7, +1. And point D is at -3, +2. Okay, so here's my segment. Now the first transformation I want to do is the first one listed. Okay, that transformation is the reflection in the x-axis. Okay, so I want to reflect both of those points over that x-axis. So point C is 1 unit from the x-axis. So I'll go 1 unit away from it. Okay, that will be your point C prime. Point D is 2 units away from the x-axis, so we'll go 2 units in the opposite direction to get D prime, to create our first image segment here. Now I do want to write out those prime coordinates. So C prime is at -7, -1. And D prime is at -3, -2. Now I want to write out those prime coordinates so that it's easier to do this rotation for my second transformation. So my second transformation here is a rotation 90 degrees about the origin. Well, we have rules for our rotations. So the rule for 90 degrees is opposite of y, x. So that's the rule I want to use to change my two prime coordinates here. Okay, so C prime to C double prime, I need to take the opposite of my y value. So my y value in C prime is -1. What's the opposite of -1? +1. And then I want to keep my x value the same. Okay, so since my x value is -7, I should keep it as -7. Do not change it to a +7 just because this says x. Okay, you need to keep it as -7. Okay, next one, D double prime. Opposite of y, our y value is -2. So take the opposite sign for that one, that is 2. Then we need to take our x value. Our x value is -3. So now that I have my two double prime coordinates, I can plot them on my graph. So C double prime is at 1, -7. and D double prime is at 2, negative 3. Okay, so here's my composition of transformations for example 2. First we reflected, then we rotated. Okay, questions on example 2? All right, then I do want you to go to the back. So the combination of two reflections in parallel lines is the same as a translation. So in my picture below here, if I look at my pre-image where this P value is here, I reflect that triangle over line K. Okay, I get P prime. And then I reflect that one over line L, I get P double prime. Now if I look at just my pre-image and my final image here, from this one to this one, we would just consider that a translation. So you can see if you have two reflections, you do end up with a translation. Okay, so two reflections in parallel lines is a translation. Now the composition of two reflections in intersecting lines is the same as a rotation. So I had two reflections in parallel lines for our first example there. That was a translation. Now we have two reflections in intersecting lines. That's the same as a rotation. So here I have my pre-image, A. We reflect it over line K to get A prime. And then reflect that over line L to get A double prime. Now if I look from A to A double prime here, it does look like it just rotates around this way. Okay? And your center of rotation then would be that intersecting point P. Okay, so the center of rotation is that intersection point of those two lines. So we are going to do examples of this. So in letters A and B, we want to reflect each figure over line N and then line Q. Okay, and then describe the transformation. So your pictures don't have to be perfect. Okay, it's fine. So first one I want to do is this smiley face over line N. Okay, so it should be upside down. So reflecting that over line N, it will be upside down. And then reflecting that one over line Q, it would be right side up. Okay, so from our pre-image to our final image here, it does just look like a translation, like it just slid straight down. Okay, if I just look at this one to this one. Okay, so that's how I would describe this. So that would look like a translation. For letter B, again, first I want to reflect this over line N. So that's this line here. Okay, so I reflect it over line N, and then I want to reflect that over line Q.
Can you like lower your standards?
Of what?
Giant hearts is hard. We're gonna have to do
So from, no, you wouldn't have to do this on test. So from our pre-image to our final image here, this looks like it's rotating around Okay, rotating around this center point right here. Okay. So many patterns in the real world are created using compositions of transformations. So this leaf pattern is very similar to that footstep pattern that we began with. Okay, so for each leaf, what I could do is translate it to the right and then reflect it over. Okay, I would reflect over this line here. So translate right, reflect over to get our final image. And you would do that each time to create that pattern. Okay, so translate, reflect, translate, reflect. Again, that's called a glide reflection. Okay, so looking at these carpet pattern below here, I want you guys to answer these two questions, letter A and B. So think about your different transformations and how you could reflect, translate, rotate, any combination of them to create that pattern. Okay, so look at those patterns. Try and figure out how you could change one part of it to get to the other part. It is. Look at how easy that was.
Yeah, all I gotta do is write the name.
Timer for his phone so you can charge it so it's computer doesn't go out.
Thank you, Alyssa.
That's a good idea. I've already asked myself this question.
I was gonna say something about
I've never thought of that before. What? Yeah, I thought I was doing this so maybe.
That's a glide reflection.
So your phone keeps charging.
Sure.
I still think it was
Oh, I can just shut my computer and plug it in there. Oh, that now she's. Yeah. Mark it.
No, but
I do. Oh, I'm not. I've done mapping already.
anybody else?
Anyways.
You didn't try out, so you can't go.
All right, so going through patterns A and B here. Okay, pattern A, what you can do is take a section. Okay, it doesn't matter which section. And you could rotate that section all the way around that center point to create that pattern. So rotation. For this one, I could take this shaded in section. Yeah, it is. So I'd translate it and then reflect it over.
I don't know.